Can you elaborate a little bit on on two things? One is hormone or adrenaline, sorry. So how adrenaline and kind of hormone cascades affect things like conditioning. I mean, the walkout's a great example, right? These fighters sit in the back, they warm up to some degree. Maybe they wait 10 minutes, maybe they wait 35 minutes. This happens to competitors on IBJJF or even local regional stuff. You go, you weigh in, they put you in the corral, and then I've had a tournament where it was 45 minutes later. So maybe you can talk first on what does adrenaline do to your conditioning on that day when you arrive, when you've done all the preparation and everything, and now you're here, you're in the tournament, you're in the competition, you're about to walk in the octagon, what adrenaline does. And then secondly, I'd like to talk about what body shots do to your level of conditioning and why that has such an acute effect. And they say in boxing and in striking, invest in the body early. Is that just a thing that announcers say, or is there a physiological effect that's happening to our bodies when we're receiving those shots that begin to take away from that gas tank?
Yeah, I mean, sure. First is adrenaline, right? Adrenaline is this hormone that drives up our ability to produce more force, more power. It increases awareness. It does a lot of things. It's part of basically what we call the stress response, and it's the stress response for a reason, because we have to be able to respond to some sort of external stressor. And at the highest levels, our adrenaline and other hormones like noradrenaline and cortisol and all these things are just surging through our bodies because we know we have to produce all this force and power, and we're going to be in front of people and we could get knocked out. There's just this huge rush. So on the one hand, it potentiates performance, where it makes us capable of higher levels of force and power than we would be able to generate if we didn't have it. On the other hand, it's also going to increase the cost of doing anything, because we're producing so much force and power that it's easy to do. It's easy to essentially overproduce it to the point where it's costing us more energy to produce the same level of power output. And then you have this big dump in the backside, because evolutionarily speaking, like the fight or flight response is not meant to be held for 25 minutes. It's fight or flight. It's go catch the prey or don't be the prey yourself. And it's get out of dodge before you get eaten or go eat something else. It wasn't meant to be 5-minute rounds of being chased or chasing someone around. So we don't have the capacity to sustain these very high heart rates, these very anaerobically driven periods, and these very high levels of adrenaline for very long without the body having to start to pull back, because it's just, it's so stressful in the body, and it creates an internal environment that is not conducive to continuing, performance. So, when you overproduce adrenaline, it just means you're producing more than you actually need. Like if I can produce, I'm just making numbers up here, like 500 watts of power without a huge amount of adrenaline, then I want to be able to do that. If I produce twice the amount of adrenaline necessary, it's just increasing the cost of doing everything. And that's going to increase my rate of slowing down. So it's a double-edged sword. You want the right amount and you need the right amount, but overproducing it just makes you more likely to slow down faster and gas out. So it's about control. It's about the ability of your body to control that. And that's where the mental side of the game really comes in. It's where being focused and relaxed and aware and having the skill set to not overproduce adrenaline and not gas yourself out with that becomes such a vital trait and such an important skill to develop. And it's something I think people don't develop intentionally enough. It's an area we can train intentionally in a lot of different ways, and it makes a big difference. So
to stick on that for a moment, sorry, real quick, to stick on that. So as a conditioning coach, I think a lot of people think, they just strap people up to a VO2 max assessment. They find out a couple of special numbers, they punch it in a computer, and then they just make these people run on, incline treadmills and then train their sport. This is a huge area of coaching to get these athletes to stay calm under pressure, right? To then capitalize on dump the adrenaline when you're in ground and pound, right? Or dump the adrenaline in the scramble in the last minute of your finals match versus the being in the corral waiting for your first match, right? So is that actually something that you talk about with your athletes? Like how to, yes, we're doing all this work, we're building this engine, this capacity and all this stuff, but you got to learn like where your gears are for this kind of thing too. Do you talk to them about that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's all trainable. These are all trainable traits, qualities. So there's two things to it. The first is, as you mentioned, you need to be aware of your gears, or however you want to use the terminology. You need to be aware of what your body is capable of, because there's a point where when you go above a certain power output, the price of that the cost of that is fatigue. And so you need to be aware of kind of where those lines are. And they need to be very, very clear of, if I'm going to go for this finish, or I'm going to keep pushing for this takedown, or I'm going to whatever, if they don't get it, there's a price to pay for that. No matter what your fitness level is, you're still going to cause yourself some fatigue if you go for something and you're just cranking on something and you don't get it. there's a price for that, and you need to be aware of that in the moment, and make an informed decision. Should I go for this, or should I back off because I'm not going to get it? And that's part of just building an intelligence in the athlete and building experience. And that's a huge part of coaching. Don't go for something if you're not going to get it, because you're going to potentially gas yourself out and get knocked out right afterwards. We've seen this happen dozens of times. So this should be both the skill coaches reinforcing this and developing that fight IQ, but also as a strength and conditioning coach, I'm having heart rate monitors on my athletes. I'm building that awareness through their cardiovascular training, through their conditioning. They see what their heart rates are at. They start to become much more aware of, oh, hey, when I hit my 160s, like I can't sustain much more than this before I start to slow down. So they need to know what that feels like. They need to build that awareness and training so that they're consciously aware of it in the fight. And again, you certainly had to fight reflexively because you develop those reflexes, but you also have to be thinking your way through fights. And if you're not thinking your way through fights, you're going to get out, strategized by somebody who is. And then the second thing is, part of this adrenaline is just the body is not very calm when it's dealing with unfamiliar situations. And the first fight, you're going to be loaded up with nerves, and you've got all this adrenaline pouring through your system. By your 50th fight as a pro, a lot of that's gone, or at least it should be. And it's not nearly the same as it was. So just doing things like getting yourself into the octagon or the arena that you're going to be competing in as part of your training at the same time of day, having the same food, just having the fewest things being unfamiliar on fight night, and having warm-up routines and walkout routines and going through those routines, all the familiarity you can bring into a fight, the more the athlete's going to feel comfortable, and the less they're likely to, have an adrenaline dump or just way overthink it and talk themselves into bad situations. So there's a lot of things you can do. This is a huge part of the game.